Good afternoon, everyone. If you would grab a seat. Thank you for being here this afternoon. My name is Zoe Wheel. I'm the Director of Special Projects at the Levitt Jewish Community Center. We are in our 4th season of Southern Jewish Voices. This is a program where we interview people in the community, in the Jewish community, to learn about the very diverse life of Jews in the South. All of these are stored online. You can get through to our website to look at past interviews. We're really excited. Today is going to be our first intergenerational interview. This program is in part funded by the Birmingham Jewish Federation and Foundation, and we're grateful to that. I'm going to, since we have 3 people talking today, 3 Pizitzim in the Pizitz Auditorium, which is great. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Margaret, and we'll let our guests introduce themselves. Thank you.
Awesome. Yes, you all can clap. Thank you all for being here today, and thank you, Zoe. This is such a great interview to be closing out 2025 before we move into a spring of our next round of interviews, starting off 26. And as Zoe mentioned, this is our first intergenerational interview. So we have had couples up here before. We've had 2 people. I don't think we've ever had 3. So it's going to be a little bit of a challenge. We're going to be passing mics. We have a lot to get to. So bear with us. But I think that this is going to be a great conversation. And if we hit 50 minutes, don't worry. We'll still keep mostly on time today. So I would like to start off just with some introductions, and I'm going to start with Dick here and ask you all to move down the line. And since this is intergenerational, I would love for everybody to just share your name and the year you were born so that we can kind of situate ourselves in time here. First time that we're asking this one.
I'll be glad to say my name, which is Dick Pizitz. Can I lie about the year I was born? No?
Well, Richard did tell me he was going to fact check you, so.
All right, if the fact checkers are here, 1930.
Okay, and you can just pass to him next.
Richard Pizitz Jr., and born 1957.
Andrew Pizitz, born 1988.
Awesome. Thank you all, and I promise I will not make our future interviewees answer that question. So I'm going to have you pass the mic back to Dick here, and I would love for you to start with a little Pizitz family history for us. We are here in the Pizitz Auditorium. We have a picture of Louis Pizitz looking down upon us. Tell us a little bit about the Pizitz origin story.
Okay. Louis Pizitz was my grandfather, and generational down here. Louis Pizitz was born in Brest-Litovsk, which was part of Poland at the time. He later moved to Bialystok, which was 75 miles away from where he was born. He was studying to be a rabbi, and he did not pursue that. He told the story of that he and another man went to work with shoddy. Shoddy was the lowest form of cloth in Russia, made from rags. And that they didn't have money enough to ship the shoddy that they had bought in covered rail cars, and they shipped it in open cars. And he told me they had terrible snows, and he did not have enough money to pay for it because all the shoddy was ruined. And that was his decision, really, to come to the United States. He came to the United States. He spoke not a word of English. He said he did not have any money, 0 in his pocket. He got off in New York. Somehow there, he met a woman named Mrs. Frank who lived in Georgia, and she gave him things to peddle, jewelry and other things, and he gradually learned English, rudimentary English, and he peddled during the day. And he knew he had family in Georgia, and when he got enough money, he started walking with a pack on his back toward Georgia and pedaled along the way. And he eventually got enough money to buy a horse and buggy, and he ended up in Swainsboro, Georgia. And in Swainsboro, he married my grandmother, Minnie Smoletsky, and he opened a small store. I think it was about 2,500 square feet. And after some year in Swainsboro, my grandmother said to him, she said, "Louis, you're never going to amount to anything in this little town. We need to go to Atlanta or Birmingham." And for him, that was an easy decision because Birmingham was bigger than Atlanta. It had more resources, and it had iron, steel, coal, limestone, and very few places had that. And they came to Birmingham, and he opened a very small store here. And I don't know how much you want me to go into my grandfather. Do you at this point?
Maybe talk a little bit too about, so he, first of all, that's an incredible story. So he gets here, he opens the store, but along with becoming, a businessman in the city, he also really becomes involved in civic life.
Yeah.
What would you say about that?
My grandfather was involved in almost every civic endeavor in Birmingham. He was chairman of one of the two Catholic campaign drives. He was the chairman of the Knights of Columbus. He was chairman of the Negro United Way, which it used to be called when there were two United Ways. And he, during the Depression, when no one had money, and I mean no one, he bought coal mines and he mined coal and sold it at cost to keep the coal miners employed. The school teachers were not paid in cash because Alabama had no cash, and they were paid in scrip, which was basically worthless. It was selling at 50 cents on the dollar what the school teachers got the scrip. But he told them at Pizitz they would get 100 cents on the dollar. People told him he was crazy to do this, but after the Depression, the state redeemed all of this so-called worthless scrip for 100 cents on the dollar. During Thanksgiving, he threw open the basement of the store and had a Thanksgiving dinner and invited anyone who was hungry to come for Thanksgiving dinner at Pizitz. And he built the legacy of civic contribution, that it was part of our family, that we were to participate in things like that got me and Richard and Andrew involved in it. And many of you out there have done as much or many more things than we have done. So we're not standing here paragons of civic endeavor, but it was imbued in me as I worked in the store that we were to participate in any campaign we could that helped the community. And I remember starting out working in Community Chest, which later became United Way, and going door to door and soliciting $50 contributions downtown from every merchant. And it was something we were expected to do, Margaret.
That's a wonderful answer, and I know we're going to get more into sort of all of your leadership positions further on. I think I'm actually going to ask this next question a little differently. I said no curveballs, but I don't think this will be a big one. I'm going to ask you to pass the mic to Richard here. And so we just heard a little bit about Louis Pizitz and that generation. Richard, I would love if you could speak a little bit to your grandparents, Dick's parents, and sort of that next generation of Pizitz family history.
So, grandparents Isidore and Hortense, known as Mickey. I think that was a good decision to use that nickname. But they were very loving grandparents, and have many memories of. We would go over there almost every Sunday night for dinner, and it was a home cooked meal, around a big table, and it was just very warm and close family and that was maintained really throughout most, certainly all my childhood, going there, and those memories are very vivid and lasting, enduring.
And what could you tell us, if anything, and we can also pass this one back to Dick as well, but would love to hear a little bit about your family's involvement in Jewish, and sort of the start of Jewish communal institutions as well. So I know, for example, Temple Bethel. Speak a little bit to that if you can.
Well, I think I would defer to my father's memory on exactly what, Big Papa is, Lewis, what his involvement was, but I know that he was, a leader in raising money for, was it Young Men Hebrew Association at the time, to have a building, and I think bringing LJCC here. Obviously, this auditorium is named for him. So he was really, and he was behind, many fundraising attempts with Bethel and Emmanuel. So he was involved, soup to nuts, really, with every Jewish organization in town during his lifetime.
Dick, what would you add to that? I'll just have you pass that mic back to him real quick.
What was the question?
What would you add about your parents' or grandparents' involvement in starting Jewish institutions here in Birmingham? Young Men's Hebrew Association, the Temple.
I'll tell you one thing further I forgot to say about
please.
my grandfather. During the Depression, with all that went on, Pizitz could not pay its bills. And he was called into the First National Bank, which today is Regions. And since Andrew works at Regions, I better be careful what I say, but the president of First National called my grandfather in, and he said, "Lewis, you haven't paid this bill, this bill, this bill." And he jumped on my grandfather about he had to pay his bills or else. And my grandfather told me the story, and my dad affirmed that it was a true story. It wasn't legend. My grandfather took the keys of the store out, put them on his desk, and I don't remember if it was Oscar Wells or General Persons, who was head of First National then. And he said to him, "I can't pay my bills," left the keys. He said, "You're in the department store business." And my grandfather went to the corner of First Avenue and 20th Street, where the bank was, on his way back to the store. And he said, before the traffic light changed, somebody grabbed him by the shoulder, and it was the bank president. He said, "Louis, come on back in, let's talk this over. We don't want to be in the department store business." So that's how close we came.
It's a great story. Anything else you would add about Jewish involvement before we move on?
No, it was just, for our family, it was something that was important generationally. And there are lots of families that I see seated here who have done so much for this community.
Great. Well, I'm going to have you pass the mic down. We're going to go all the way to Andrew. And Andrew, before we sort of move on from family history to our next subject, I would love to ask you, I think we determined a fifth generation Pizitz here in Birmingham.
Yes.
Sort of what does it mean to you to have that family legacy and to live in a city where your family has such deep roots in the community?
It's an immense source of pride, first and foremost. I mean, I wasn't around during the department store days, but I have experiences now with people. I was in the line at Clear at the airport, and some lady pulled me aside when she saw my name and told me a story about her experience when she was a kid in the Pizitz Department Store. So it's very meaningful. With that pride comes responsibility. I see a responsibility to continue that legacy, to be involved not just in the civic side of it, but to be involved in business and success. And so that was instilled in me, and I want that to be instilled in my kids as well. So it's an immense source of pride.
And that's a great story about getting pulled aside. I'm not from Birmingham, but I do feel like I've heard people relate stories about Pizitz Department Stores. It's clearly such a sort of structure and community memory, and also a great segue to my next question, which is for your father, Richard. I would love to talk a little bit more about the department store, and I think the first thing I'd like to ask you is if you could speak a little bit more to how the business shaped you as a young person, maybe even share a memory or two of being in the department store growing up, or what that sort of was as a place for you as a young person.
Well, it was, as Andrew said, a great source of pride, but it was also a responsibility that I felt, from early on, that this was my destiny and legacy, and memories as even a child coming down on Saturday to the store or Sunday, I guess Sunday when the store was closed. My father would open the door and we'd go in, and occasionally my cousin Jeff was there. We would take bikes out of the toy department and we'd ride through the China department just for to make sure see how challenging that was, and we just had just enjoyed from very early on. And then when I maybe 14, 15, I started working in the stores, stock boy, and then was a sales associate, and so there was always that. From very early on, I was part of the store. It was in not only my genes, but it was my whole existence. Our family all revolved around it. Every discussion at the dinner table was about work, what had gone on, and what the store was doing, and so that business kind of instilled in me from a very early age and was part of me. And I loved going down there working. Special memories would be holiday season was such as now. It was downtown in those days was, many of you remember that, it was everything. I mean, it was very hustle and bustle. There were no real suburban area stores to speak of that were a center, but the downtown area was the center of business activity. And we had huge crowds of people, and it was just so much fun being there and waiting on people. And I learned the importance of customer service very early on, which is not a skill they practice so much anymore, but it is a very useful skill in probably any endeavor you pursue, in my opinion, that to learn to treat people well. So that's something that I think was also instilled in me as part of that history.
And you shared with me that you always knew you were going to go into the family business. What was it like sort of stepping into that role in a more professional sense?
Well, it was a lot of responsibility, a lot of work. Retail is hard. It became harder as, I think it became harder as I got older because it became more competitive. The access to capital was really critically important for stores. If they didn't grow, department stores didn't grow, they died. And that's why you have seen all the consolidation that's taken place and why there are only a few department stores today, a few names. But that was a real change that I think we experienced was during my tenure as buyer, assistant, and management. And ultimately why we sold, because we didn't have that access to capital that we would have needed.
Yeah, it's interesting because you were really, I think, there in sort of a moment that was such a changing moment for retail generally. And I guess I'm curious, this could be for you or your father or both. Was it bittersweet to close the store that had all these memories as well, or a relief?
I'll let my father go first, since he sold us out.
I might add, with seeing how everyone looks for the shorter work week today, for at least 20 years, my brother Michael and I worked 6 days a week and 2 nights a week. And it's what was expected. It's what was needed.
Of us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mark.
Oh, and well, I guess actually let me go back here a little bit too, because it was fun hearing your memories of growing up in the store. Any memories that you would share from your younger years in the store?
Memories of the store?
Yeah, because it's occurring to me that you were also a child during the time where the store was open.
I mean, I knew from the day I graduated grammar school that eventually I was going to end up at Pizitz. It was just what was expected. It was a legacy. There was no question of ever doing anything other than that for me, and also for Richard as well, and for my two brothers, Michael and Merritt. And Pizitz, over the years, we changed dramatically. Pizitz used to be a bargain, lower price store, and we found that to compete, to get to the top, we had to trade up. We had to change our image to something younger, more fashionable, and it took a lot of effort, and we managed to do that. Our advertising for 2 or 3 years nationally won the top advertising in the United States of any department store because it was such a change. We did a great deal of institutional advertising that said, for instance, it played on the name Pizitz, and it says, "Isn't that some leaning tower in Pizitz in Italy?" And you say, "No, there's a Pizitz at Pizitz," and went on to talk about the home legacy. And we changed our image to a fashion leader, and I guess proudly we could say there are not many department stores that survived. We received an offer to buy us out in 1986. At our first meeting, and my father had just died 3 years before. At our first meeting, I was the only one I think that was in favor of selling because I saw what I thought was on the horizon for department stores. And eventually the entire family came over to that we ought to accept the offer and sell. And I may not be Catholic, but thank God.
That's great.
And we've gone into a number of other retailing enterprises. We opened 35 Hallmark stores. We were the 5th or 6th largest Hallmark retailer in the country. We opened 65 cookie stores, and I think we were the largest single cookie operator in the country. We sold that business 2 years ago, and today we have Gus Meyer in Summit and Gus Meyer in Nashville, which are remarkably successful fashion stores. Quietly, I will add, we went in the yogurt business for 2 years, and that was a disaster. So you can't win them all.
That's fair. And I will say, too, for anybody who's interested in learning more in depth about the history of the store and the business, I know that you all brought a copy of your book that you're going to leave in the library today. And I thought we were going to auction it off. Okay, well, I wasn't in on that plan. We could do that at the end, too. But I've started looking through it myself, and it's a great book, so definitely check it out. The next subject I want to hit on, and I know we're not going to go so in-depth into this today just for the sake of time, but I do think maybe we have time, Dick, for you to offer just, a short reflection on, you came into the business right in the midst of sort of the civil rights period in Birmingham, and you have recounted that story in full in so many different venues, and I'm actually going to share out after this a wonderful link to a talk that Dick gave at Temple Bethel several years ago for people who really want to get into the weeds of that story. But I wonder if you could just share a minute or two of sort of, and I'm thinking of how to frame this, like, what do you think people maybe misunderstand about that moment, or just one thing that you would want to bring out to share with people? To you, yeah.
Civil rights in Birmingham.
Do you have the mic in your hand?
I'm sorry. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. Martin Luther King went to Albany, Georgia in 1962 to desegregate the South. He was jailed. Police chief, a man named Laurie Pritchett, came into his cell the next day and said, "Dr. King, you've been bailed out." you're free to go. He said, who paid my bail? And the police chief said, I did, Dr. King. You may leave. And this was considered a great failure because they had geared up for Albany. He later came to Birmingham. And the focus eventually, I'm shortening a story obviously, he could get no one, Fred Shuttlesworth and Martin Luther King could get none of the big industries, not Stockton, not U.S. Steel, who employed 25,000 people, not any of the big law firms, Alabama Power, the banks, but they could focus on the retailers. And people like us, people like Jack Allen's father and uncle were on the line of fire, and a lot of other Jewish merchants downtown. And short.
What you're saying, to integrate, he was trying to get them to put on African American sales.
Yeah, I mean,
and
what they finally came to the retailers and said, we want you to do 4 things. We want you to desegregate the drinking fountains, then the restrooms, then have black salespeople, and those that had restaurants desegregate the restaurants. And we agreed to do that under heavy pressure from Bull Connor and the Klan and the White Citizens Council. And there was a lot of pressure on every one of the Jewish merchants to do it, but it was done. And the only thing I can say about the success that only the merchants, we may not have done it altruistically. Maybe we did it under pressure, but we had the guts to do it. And I saw an interview with the New York Daily News and Bull Connor a year later, and Connor said, they asked him about it, Connor said, I would have beaten King if those damn merchants hadn't given in. So that was a part of our history too.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm going to have you pass the mic actually to Andrew next, because I would love to follow that up by asking you, I'm sure that you have grown up hearing these stories from your grandfather. I'm curious sort of what you take away from learning about that history or how it's influenced you hearing those stories.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe it was only 60 years ago. It seems like it should have been a lot longer ago than that. And so learning about that, going to the Civil Rights Museum, my grandfather, I remember, took me when I was very young. So it was always, a source of pride, and that was integration efforts really turned the tide of the civil rights movement. We're seeing kind of a rise in discrimination now in anti-Semitism, so it kind of rings true throughout the generations. There's always going to be hate. I think it's important to rise above that and live in peace and harmony with your neighbors. And I learned about it in textbooks, but I also get to hear it firsthand from my relatives, which is very powerful.
And Richard, is there anything you would add? You were, a young person in the early 1960s, so I'm sure you don't have sort of those primary memories yourself. But
I don't have the memories because I was 7 years old, but 8 years old. But having gone to see my father speak at numerous Leadership Birmingham classes, also meetings sponsored by the Civil Rights Museum, and he is, it's always, I feel very proud the role that he has taken in highlighting to younger generations what occurred. So they know what happened and what the roles of the Birmingham, the government, what existed at the time, and how they fought to keep segregation in place, and then how ultimately it was defeated, or at least integration started and improves conditions dramatically. But it's always been very proud of my father's role in highlighting that for younger generations.
Absolutely, and I will share out that link with everybody afterwards as well. And Andrew, you mentioned anti-Semitism being on the rise today. Dick, I would love if we can pass the mic back to him for a moment. If you could share with us a little bit too, you shared with me that your family was one of the first Jewish families to move to Mountain Brook when you were a young person, and that you did experience real anti-Semitism. I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about that.
We were one of the first families to move to Mountain Brook, and anti-Semitism, in those years, I was early teens, mid-teens. Anti-Semitism was rampant in Birmingham, and it was violent. Sometimes had to fight my way home. The best example, and I told Margaret this, and I guess that's what she wants me to repeat. When Diane McWhirter wrote the book Carry Me Home, which won the Pulitzer Prize, she said that her quest in writing the book was to find out if her father was in the Klan. And she interviewed me several times for the book, and I'm sure some other people in this room were interviewed too, because she did a lot of that. And I said, Diane, I said, I could have saved you writing the book. I had frequent encounters with your father, and he absolutely was in the Klan. There was no question about it. And the one incident that I remember, I went to the Boy Scout Troop 52, which met at Mountain Brook Elementary School, and I didn't particularly want to be in it because there were either one or at most two Jews in that troop, and we were teased or treated differently. And one evening, I came outside after the meeting was over, and my bike was lying smashed on the ground. And one of the kids told me that Martin McWhirter, this was Diane McWhirter's father, who was my age, and they lived 6 doors from us, that he had run my bike up the flagpole and dropped it to the ground. And I don't remember how I got home, but I know that the next day my mother called Martin McWhirter's mother and told her what had happened. And Martin's bike was on my doorstep that night. And about a week later, after riding his bike for a week, a brand new bike showed up and Martin got his bike back. But that was my mother's force, and Diane learning that, Diane McWhirter learning, just verifying what she knew, that her father was in the Klan. And all I can tell you is Martin McWhirter would turn over in his grave if he knew that several years ago Diane McWhirter married a Jew in New York.
Dick, it occurs to me that we haven't heard all that much about your mother. Is there anything that you would want to share with us about your mother?
About my mother?
Yeah, I don't know that we've talked about her so much.
My mother was very active in the community. Her name was Hortense Pizitz, and I noticed when Andrew and Julie had 2 little girls that Hortense was not in the running for the top name. And my father's name was Isidore, and that wasn't in the running either for what became Leo. My mother was the first Jewish woman's chairman of Community Chest, United Way. She was the first woman on the board, and she was heavily involved in this community and civic endeavors, and totally involved with her mother, with her family. That was her involvement.
That's great.
I remember at my mother's funeral, I gave the eulogy, and today eulogies are 5 or 6 people coming up and speaking. I spoke one paragraph that lasted 1 minute for my mother, less than a minute, in saying my mother, to her, one thing was important, and that was family.
That's great. Well, I'm going to kind of segue us into a few questions to go down the line here. And so we'll start with you and kind of pass it. But what I would love for all three of you to answer is what has been one or two meaningful roles that you've had in the community, within the Jewish community or outside of the Jewish community, that you would want to highlight? I know that we don't have enough time to cover all the civic involvement in this row, but I would love for each of you to just pick out one or two things you've worked on that have been especially meaningful. We'll start with Dick and go to Andrew.
We'll start with who?
We'll start with you, and then we'll pass it down.
Well, I was the first chairman of the Birmingham Jewish Foundation, and we raised approximately that many dollars my year. But we did get some good lawyers and accountants and got the framework for the foundation to start. I was later a chairman of the Birmingham Jewish Federation, and I remember my goal was $320,000, and that doesn't sound like very much when compared to this year's number going to be, what, $2.5 million? Is that about right?
I should know that number off the top of my
I
head,
think-
but someone should ask Florina.
The goal is
Listen
$3
to her.
million. All right. But I did look at an inflation calculator. And if you took the year that I was chairman with a 320,000 goal and put the inflation calculator on it, we raised $3.5 million in today's dollars, so it wasn't so bad. I had the pleasure of being president of United Way one year, and I was lucky in getting to do things that were important to me, and that the company could give up the time for me to do some of these things that I like doing. I think the best thing I was on the, I forget the name of it, but it was to bring inclusiveness into a community. And we went to Montgomery, and the mayor of Montgomery, who had been criticized for the heavy police presence in Montgomery and that blacks were getting the short end of the stick in Montgomery, he came up to me before the meeting and he said, "Dick, I'm glad we finally got a conservative businessman to be on this committee. All these other people the word woke wasn't heard of then, but all these other people are liberals. It's glad to get a conservative businessman." When the meeting was over, he never spoke to me again.
That's great. And Richard, what about for you? What have been some of the most meaningful things that you've gotten to work on in the community?
I have been in a good number of charitable organizations, but certainly the most memorable would be, and ones I have been most attached to, would be LJCC. I was president. I was on the board for probably 20 years.
Wow.
And I was president in 2008 and 9, which were kind of rough years with the monetarily, but we did fine back then. But that was always near and dear to my heart. And then the foundations, I was Birmingham Jewish Foundation. I was president of the foundation from maybe 2017, 18. And then I was on their board for maybe 12 years or so. And was on the Federation's board for many years. But those are certainly, great memories, and just working with very committed individuals, all of whom, have the same goal in mind. It was really a far more enjoyable, you hear this a lot, people say, but it really is true. You feel like you get more out of it than you contribute. And that's what my feeling was in all those experiences.
And Andrew, what about for you?
Wish I would have gone first on this one.
I did give you some hard acts to follow
Yeah,
here. It could
come
be
on.
things you've been involved in or looking forward to being involved
I
in.
know. So, I'm starting on the foundation board this upcoming year, so following
Great.
in the footsteps of my predecessors here. And in Atlanta, we were in Atlanta for 15 years, my wife and I and family, and so we involved in the Atlanta Jewish Federation and on the Young Leadership Board of Friends of the IDF, which is a cause that's very near and dear and important to me. So, that's starting in my Birmingham civic duty. I'm about a year and a half in and have a 1-year-old, so I feel like I'm in a position where I have more time to give and look to get more involved going forward, but starting with the foundation.
I'm impressed that you just said you have a 1-year-old, so you have more time to give.
First year's tough, and a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old.
And before you pass it
Yeah.
back, I would actually love for you to just briefly touch on, you shared with me that the intent, you were in Atlanta for 15 years, but the intent was always to come back. Can you speak a little bit more as to why that was for you?
Yeah, we always had planned to come back. I see my mother-in-law in the crowd over there and my mom. So getting closer to family, grandparents, it was very important to us. I mean, we're both, fifth generation Birminghamians, so we wanted to be back. And then also the Jewish community here was a big factor in that. I mean, it's a very close-knit Jewish community that we have a deep connection to, and we wanted our kids to grow up in that experience as well. And we had a great childhood here, and not like Atlanta was bad, it's just different. And it was always in the cards, and my daughter was starting kindergarten the summer before we moved back, so that was kind of the timing that led to it.
Well, I've got one more for you, and then I'm going to have you
Yeah.
pass it back down the line. And I'm going to ask all three of you the same question again, which is, we always ask people when they're guests here to talk a little bit about the role that Judaism plays for them, for their family. At least in our pre-interview, you all actually had pretty similar answers, but would love if Andrew could kick us off. Just what does Judaism mean to you and your family? What role does it play in your life?
I mean, it's a key part of our identity. I mean, it's from childhood, going to Shabbat dinners at my great-grandparents' house on my mom's side, going to Sunday school, getting a bar and bat mitzvah. I mean, those are all very important things in your life. I was in the Abraham Mesh BBYO group here, joined a Jewish fraternity in college. My son goes to Chabad for preschool, so it's obviously very important to us, and it's kind of formed the foundation of who we are. And so I know my wife feels the same way.
I'll have your dad answer that next.
I don't want to go second after that, but
I think you're unfortunately going to go second for every question.
exactly. I mean, for me, it's really about family. I mean, certainly it forms the foundation, as Andrew said, of who we are, and it's our religious beliefs. But it's more, for me, about the connection with the family and how we all celebrate Jewish holidays together, how we gather around Passover table, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah, Erev Rosh Hashanah, and it's about those experiences that become much more foundational and important. And now to share that with the next generation, with my grandchildren, it's just magical. It really is.
And Dick, what would you add? What does Judaism mean to you? What's important about Judaism to you?
Everything. I mean, when you read yesterday's paper about Bondi Beach and things like that, it really gets to the heart of things, the fear, the anti-Semitism today that exists in this country. The level of it, I don't think has been reached maybe ever. And, seeing the sheriff's cameras outside the center, outside Temple Emmanuel, speaks to what it means to be a member of a minority. But Judaism is important to me. I was never bar mitzvahed. I guess I'm a secular Jew. I was confirmed, at least I made that far. But Judaism is just very important to me.
So I think I'm going to ask you and Richard the same question and Andrew a different one. And I'm putting you a little bit on the spot with this one because I didn't write it down here. But I would love if you have any sort of words of advice to the next generation of leadership. You know, what would you give as advice to those leaders who are coming up in the Jewish community?
I think people that have the time, the talent, and the money to do it owe it to their communities to participate in making their community a better place to live and a better place for people who cannot afford themselves the same luxuries, the same trappings that you may have. And that's been indoctrinated into me, and I think into Richard and Andrew over the years as well, that's important to me.
And I'm going to have you give Richard the mic. And Richard, I'm going to ask you the same question. What advice or words of wisdom could you give to the next generation of leaders who hopefully are going to listen to this interview?
I would say be open-minded, listen to your constituents, and be inclusive, and try to make the Jewish institutions that you're working for as welcoming to as many people as possible. That we're in a very today it's not a insular Jewish community longer. It's you know, a lot of interfaith programming, I think, is important. I would just say that we need to make this certainly that holds true for the JCC is a perfect example. Be welcoming to as many faiths as possible, but also to open your organization and not be as maybe insular as in the past.
I think that's great advice. And Andrew, we will have you back in 20 years to give advice
Thank
to everybody. But I think what I would love is to actually throw you my fun closing question.
Okay.
We always try to end on a light note. We are moving into, we are already in the holidays. We're, in Hanukkah right now. We're approaching the end of the year. What is one Pizitz family holiday tradition or memory that you could share with us today?
We always had a Christmas tree. I couldn't honestly pinpoint one specific tradition. I mean, we're always together. I think that's the key, is that we always make a point to be together, whether it's Thanksgiving or Hanukkah or even maybe Christmas. It's the time of the year where you want to spend it with family, and we always make a point to do that. Even when we lived in Atlanta, we would always come back over the holidays and sometimes split between the families, but we always made a point to see everybody and be together. And that's, my kids love that. All they want to do is be around their cousins and their grandparents, and so it's important, and my kids see that and they love it too.
I think that's actually the perfect place to end our first family intergenerational interview, so we can all give them a round of applause. And thank you all for being part of Southern Jewish Voices today. So everybody definitely look out for all the 2026 dates, and the book, I guess, is getting auctioned off to the highest bidder. No, just kidding. It'll be in the library for you. Thank you all.